The Soulblight are getting a brand new Spearhead box with their upcoming release, which does look incredibly cool with the gorgeous new White King, the Barrow Guard, and the Barrow Knights, alongside 20 of the classic but still awesome Death Rattle skeletons. But in the meantime, and even when their new army book does eventually come out, the current Spearhead of the Bloodcrave Hunt is an equally fun and honestly pretty well priced box to consider picking up if you do want to join the ranks of the undead. The Bloodcrave Hunt brings along a Vampire Lord who is leading 2 units of Death Rattle skeletons, 5 Mighty Blood Knights, and 3 monstrous Vargheists. For £87.50, you are getting a fairly decent saving compared to the £141.50 it would all cost separately, basically dropping the price by over £50, which really isn't all that shabby. But as far as the box itself goes in actual games of Spearhead, how does it stack up? Well, as you would expect from the Soulblight, it has bodies, it's got some recursion, it's got some magic, and it does have some pretty hard-hitting punch from the elite units. It is actually surprisingly fast for a Spearhead, with some solid movement on a few of the units, but also some really nasty tricks you can play to get around the board a lot more easily. It doesn't strangely have any units with the reinforcements keyword, so no native way to bring back a slain unit after it's been destroyed. That might seem a bit odd for a death faction, but trust me, there are some very powerful little tricks you can use to compensate for that. And first up in terms of the actual rules, you do of course have your battle traits. They are both fairly nice, although you do have to suffer with the rule like some of the others in the other Spearheads, where one of your units doesn't start on the battlefield. Death's Descent means that your Vargheists aren't set up during deployment. Instead, they use the swoop down rule in the 3rd battle round, and they can then essentially deep strike onto the board anywhere that is 6 inches away from enemies. So it is a pain having to wait for them to come in, but that 6-inch setup is so powerful, and it means when they do arrive, they can very easily get into combat with a pretty reliable charge and then just demolish a unit that you need to kill, or get in somewhere and steal an objective from the enemy that they may be left undefended, or just score you some points if you need to be in table edges or something like that. So it is a rule you definitely have to plan and play around, but it's one that can be very impactful in the game. You also get the Hunger, which is a passive death players will be familiar with. It grants your vampire units the ability to heal after they've fought. So each of your vampire units can heal the number of damage points they inflicted after they fight. And it's important to note this isn't just your Vampire Lord, it's all units with the vampire keyword. So it does include your Blood Knights and your Vargheists, which makes them all a lot more durable than you might think, and the Blood Knights especially with their 3-up save, 6-up ward and 3 health, even just doing 1 or 2 damage in a combat can bring a Blood Knight right back up to full wounds. So it is a really strong rule for Spearhead games, which are by their nature just a bit smaller. So getting that reliable healing on up to 3 units in your Spearhead is very powerful. Of course, on your general, the Vampire Lord, it's just brilliant. He's got 5 health, so that can help keep him trucking along a bit longer than you would think. And stuff like chip damage from small enemy chaff units, that is going to be really inefficient at taking down your general now, because he will probably be able to kill them and just keep regenning his wounds, and they're only going to be doing, sort of 2 or 3 damage to him each combat, which he'll just heal back from the damage he does to them. So he could well come out of fights against enemy chaff units or small enemy infantry squads on full health. On top of that, of course, you do get the choice of 2 separate regiment abilities. They both have potential, but I really like the first one, which is Endless Legions. This is once per battle, but in your movement phase, it allows you to pick a destroyed Death Rattle Skeletons unit, and a replacement unit is set up 6 inches away from enemy units with D6 plus 4 models. So you can get a 5 to 10 man unit of skeletons back, ready for, again, a pretty easy charge into an important target that you might need to tie up, or to kill off the last model from a unit that is standing where you want to be, or just to set them up to get onto an objective and steal it with your 5 to 10 control. And as I said earlier, yes, you don't have any units with the reinforcements keyword, but this basically gives it to you on a single unit. So if you are using your skeletons as screens or chaff, this can really go a long way to getting the most out of them if they get killed in turns 1 or 2. The other choice you get is Ruinous Charges. This is a buff to your Blood Knights specifically. It gives them the ability to do D3 mortal wounds to a unit that they pass across when they charge. Now, as we will see in just a second, they can quite easily get over and around enemy units as they move around, so this can go off quite often, and it is nice if you just want to be more aggressive with your Blood Knights and get those mortals on the enemy as you get stuck in with them. I am just personally a bit more of a defensive player, so I prefer Endless Legions, but doing D3 mortals to a unit as you charge over them can really mess up enemy screens or chaff or lone characters that may only have, 4 or 5 health. So it can be quite a significant ability and do a lot of damage over the course of the battle. So I do think it's very, very good if you are sort of aiming at the Blood Knights being sort of the main centerpiece unit of your Spearhead. Then we get to the choice of enhancements. You get 2 which are once per battle, you get a passive and what is essentially the Spearhead equivalent of a spell. So the Grave Sand Shard is up first. This is once per battle, and when you declare the Skeleton Legion ability, which is a rule your Death Rattle skeletons get, they can add 1 to the Legion roll that they make with that. It's essentially a way to regen some models on a 5+, so this makes it go off on a 4+ once per battle. So it's not bad, and it can bring back a couple of extra skeletons in an ideal situation. It's definitely got some uses, but I don't think it's one of the better picks if I'm being honest, because it's only once per battle, and all it's realistically going to do is maybe get you an extra 1 or 2 skeletons back in most scenarios. Cloud of Bats is possibly my favourite. This gives you a once per battle in your hero phase ability to remove your general from the board and set them back up 6 inches away from enemies. So if you need to sneak on and get onto another board edge for some points, or get up and try to get a charge off to support your units in a fight on the other side of the table, you can use this, and it is really, really handy. Even in Spearhead with those slightly smaller table sizes, just having the ability to move from one end of the battlefield to the other can be absolutely game changing. So to me, this is probably the best pick out of the 4. Aura of Night is one that allows you to ignore any negative stave modifiers on your general against shooting attacks. If this was against melee as well, then I think it would be amazing, but being only against shooting just kind of makes it a bit rubbish, in my opinion. There isn't that much shooting in Spearhead armies anyway. It's only really things like the Lumineth and the Caradron and a few other armies that have a unit or 2 of shooting in them, so it's not going to have a huge impact most of the time, even against some of the shootier armies. And most of the shooting in Spearhead is also -1 rend at best, so it's not like it's making a huge difference to your save. On top of that, your general can still be protected by your infantry around him, so being near those skeletons quite a bit of the time, he's not going to be targetable anyway. So I think this is probably the worst of the enhancements in my opinion. It may have some use if you are really worried about enemy shooting, but just most of the time it's going to do either nothing at all or just very, very little. Then the last one is Spirit Gale. This is the pseudo spell that Spearhead gets. This is done in your hero phase. It doesn't have the easiest casting value on a 7+ on 2d6, but if it goes off, you do a mortal damage to each enemy unit on the table. So potentially getting you a good 3 or 4 mortal damage off before you even do any movement or charges. So it can be great for chipping off 1 health models, or just making it a bit easier for you to get through tougher targets like Chaos Knights or Stormcast Annihilators if they are a big anvil standing in your way. I do like this enhancement. I think it's a bit unreliable being on a 7+, so it might not be the best option. But if your opponent has got quite a few separate units in their Spearhead and they've got a load of sort of 1 health units that you want to just chip down over the game, maybe Spearheads like the Ossiarch Bone Reapers or the Lumineth, this can actually make quite a big dent in their force over the course of a battle. So there are a good selection of abilities and enhancements. I personally feel like Endless Legions and Cloud of Bats are the best and my favourite. They both give you some potentially really good mobility, as well as the option to score some points much more easily or put some late game pressure onto an enemy objective or unit with those returning skeletons and the ability to put them pretty much anywhere on the board. But certainly the others do have a lot of value as well, and I can see myself trying Spirit Gale a lot of the time just to spam those mortals, as well as Ruinous Charges to just really get the most out of my Blood Knights. In terms of the actual units you get to bring, your general of course is the Vampire Lord. He's still got a 6-inch move, 5 health and a 3-up save backed up by a 6-up ward. The Dynastic War Relic is still 5 attacks at 2 damage, but it does lose the crit 2 hits and the anti-hero +1 rend rules, which isn't that unexpected for Spearhead. But then you also get a new spell on the War Scroll, which again is cast in your hero phase, and this is called Vile Transference. It goes off on a 6+, and you get to pick an enemy unit within 6 inches of your general, and you roll a number of dice equal to its health characteristic, and for each 5+ it takes a mortal damage, and you also heal 1 damage. So against some really big targets you can find in Spearhead, like say the Seraphon Carnosaur, you could be looking at doing quite reliably 2 or 3 damage to it and then healing yourself back up 2 or 3 health. So it's not actually a bad little spell, it's fairly reliable going off on a 6. There are some targets where it's not very good at all, things like 1 health infantry, but against those bigger generals and any monsters that the enemy has, it can actually do a noticeable amount of damage, and it can keep your general, again, alive for much longer than the opponent might think. The Blood Knights are your hard-hitting shock cavalry. 3 health with a 3-up save, a 6-up ward, and a brilliant 10-inch move is really solid in Spearhead. They've got some unbelievably good damage as well on the charge. You get 15 horse attacks from the unit, but then 15 attacks with your lances or blades, which is sort of your main damage output. These hit and wound on 3s with 1 rend and 2 damage on the charge, so they will average out nearly 9 damage against a 4-up save, which in Spearhead will let you pretty much kill almost anything you'll come across that they charge into, and they can charge a lot because their rule of Riders of Ruin allows them to move across enemy infantry as though you have the fly keyword. So any infantry screens or blocking units in your way can essentially be flat out ignored, and you can really easily charge into those important heroes or elite units that may be hiding behind them. So they are just really fast and really mobile. They've got some brilliant defense and some unbelievably good offense to throw into the enemy, and for a unit in Spearhead, they are just a very, very hard thing to get rid of because they can get where you need them to be really easily. They're hard to kill, and when they do hit, they hit very, very hard. The Vargheists, despite only coming on in turn 3, are also really good in this Spearhead, I think. They've only got a 5-up save, so they can be a bit flimsy, but they do have 4 health each and a 6-up ward, so they can last at least a little while in games of Spearhead, and getting that 6-inch charge off on the turn they arrive is going to be absolutely crucial for them, because they have 3 attacks each, which hit on 4s, wound on 3s with 1 rend and 2 damage, but they also have the crit 2 hits rule, and what that means is that they will do over 5 damage to a 4-up save unit, so not quite as good as the Blood Knights, but still very capable of dropping in turn 3, charging in, and just wiping out a unit of infantry that is sat on or near an objective. They also, quite crucially, get +1 to wound against damaged units, so if your Blood Knights or your Vampire Lord or your Skeletons have already done a bit of damage to a unit or killed a few models, these guys charging in will then be wounding on 2s, and that ups their output to nearly 7 damage when they charge in, which again is fairly impressive. And between your Vargheists and your Blood Knights, you can very reliably kill off 2 enemy units quite easily in a single combat phase if they both charge in. Finally, you do also get the 2 units of Death Rattle Skeletons. These are your screens and your chaff. You get 2 units of 10. They've only got 1 health each and a 5-up save with a 6-up ward and a fairly awful 4-inch move, although once again in Spearhead that isn't as awful as it sounds thanks to the smaller board size. But running these guys up to protect your Lord and Blood Knights is absolutely key, making sure that you are the one getting the charge off rather than being charged into those important units is so powerful. So essentially, Your skeletons are there to get in the way, take the enemy charge, and leave the way open for your Lord and Blood Knights to then countercharge into the enemy. The skeletons, they've got 2 attacks each, 4s and 4s, no rend and 1 damage, so they're not going to kill much. All 10 of them from a single unit will do about 2 to 3 damage to a 4-up save, so they aren't there for killing. As I said, their main use is to take damage and to hold out as long as possible so that you can set up a countercharge. Obviously, being able to get a unit back with Endless Legions is great, but if you didn't go for that regiment rule, they do also get another little trick to bring some models back in Skeleton Legion. And this allows you to try and bring models back in your combat phase. So you roll for each slain model in the unit, and on a 5+, you get a model back. So for example, if your unit had 9 models killed out of the 10, in your combat phase you would roll 9 dice, and then on a 5+, they will come back. So on average, getting you about 3 skeletons back in that situation. So it is quite useful. It can keep your skeletons around and being that useful roadblock or screen for longer than the enemy might think. And especially if they're trying to whittle you down with some shooting, you can get them back so that they are still in a good position and as strong as possible to take an eventual charge and get killed off so that you can then countercharge. Even just getting back 3 or 4 models over the course of the game can be super useful just for helping them do the job that they are there to do, and to also get you some more control so you can potentially steal an objective that you might be going for. So they are very, very useful in games of Spearhead. They are not especially killy, they are not especially durable, but what they are there to do, they can do really quite well. And they can also do it for a lot longer than an equivalent unit from another Spearhead might be able to do, because you can potentially get a few models back in your combat phases. So they are important to have. It's important to get them in the right position so that they can be hit, they can die, last as long as possible, but eventually they will die. And then you can hit back with your stronger units, which is where your main output will come from. So all in all, I have to say I do really like this Spearhead. I think it feels very, very Soulblighty. It's got your cool vampiric units, it's got your incredibly good speed, it's got some frankly obscene melee output, it even has some casting if you wanted to do that. And then with your 2 units of skeletons, which can come back at least in some capacity, it does also make it feel like that tide of bones that's being raised up to protect your vampiric units. So it is really cool. It's got some great thematic rules. It's got a good amount of bodies in the grand scheme of thing. The regiment abilities are both very, very strong, which is nice. I think it gives you the option to try out different things. And whilst not all of the enhancements are good, there are still 2, maybe 3 that are worth trying out and that will be fun to play around with, so you can experiment with different ways of playing this Spearhead in your games. So I'm a fan, I really like it. I can't wait to see what the new one is like when the army book comes out, but even then I think I will still be playing this one quite often just to keep trying it out and trying new things with it, because it does have a lot of potential. But as always, I'd love to know what you make of the Bloodcrave Hunt, and do you think it is going to be better or worse than the new upcoming Death Rattle Tomb Host? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.